Now, returning to the federal budget now, for a more in-depth analysis of the winners and losers, I'm joined by macro business chief economist Leith Van Onselen. Leith, thank you very much for joining me once again. Look, as I've been speaking about tonight, there are major concerns from economists about whether the spending in the budget could indirectly lead to rate rises. Do you think this is a legitimate concern?
Not really. I'm not as concerned about the impact on inflation. So obviously the key signature measures were the cost of living relief in terms of rental subsidies, energy subsidies, all those sorts of things. I think those will could bring down inflation marginally or have minimal impact. My bigger concern, Sherry, is that these are band-aids to basically cover over poor policy decisions and poor policy making by the federal government, and they do not address the underlying policy failures of this government. So, for example, I talk about it almost every week with you, it seems, Sherry, with the rental crisis. The federal government's going to spend our money to provide rental relief to a rental crisis that has been caused by the federal government's own policy failures, for example, in mass immigration. So instead of addressing the policy failures directly, they're going to provide these subsidies. The same can be said about energy subsidies. So Australia's an energy superpower, Sherry. We should have the cheapest energy in the world, but instead, through policy failure, we actually have some of the most expensive energy in the world, and that's driving up our cost of living. It's also sending our manufacturers broke. So instead of fixing the energy market directly and lowering the cost of energy for households and businesses, the federal government is instead going to spend our money to band-aid over its own policy failures. I think that's the bigger issue here, rather than focusing on whether or not it's going to impact inflation in the short run.
Look, there have been concerns, you speak about energy, that people like Twiggy Forrest will benefit from where the government's directing money and subsidies to in this budget. What's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look. The whole problem around energy is Australia has incredibly high energy prices. I'm talking about electricity and gas. I'm not obviously talking about oil because we're not an oil producer, but we export the lion's share of our coal, the lion's share of our gas. We are an energy superpower. We should have incredibly cheap energy, but through policy failures, we actually have some of the most expensive energy in the world. And as a result, we have a whole conga line of manufacturers that are going broke or have warned that they're going to exit Australia. So Qenos, Australia's last major plastics manufacturer, Orica, the explosives manufacturer, Nestle and PepsiCo have all warned in the last month that Australia's energy costs are far too high and they're going to either exit Australia or they already have exited Australia. So while the Albanese government bangs on about its future made policy, we have all these manufacturers who are effectively, said Australia is a bad place to do business because the energy costs are so high. So I think the federal government needs to focus on fixing the energy market, delivering us cheap energy, so then our manufacturers can actually survive rather than throwing money at all these, boondoggle all these boondoggle manufacturing projects.
Look, of course, the surplus last night and last year is definitely welcome, no question about that. But the deficits built in, the debt over the next decade is quite terrifying. What's your take on whether enough has been done here?
Yeah, look. Obviously, the government's delivered a small surplus this financial year. It's supposed to be bigger deficits over the next few years. By world standards, it's not incredibly high, but obviously you always you'd rather have surpluses than deficits. I think the bigger problem, Shari, is actually at the state government level. So, I talked about this with you previously. The federal government, through its high immigration policy, actually has boosted its own budget through tax receipts and company taxes. The problem is the cost of that is falling on the state governments, and now we're seeing states like Victoria drowning in monstrous amounts of debt, risking credit rating downgrades. New South Wales government's also getting buried. And a lot of the reason for that is its populations are growing really quickly, but it doesn't have the money to provide the infrastructure and services for that. And that's burying those governments in debt. So I think the bigger issue is around state budgets.
Yeah. All right, Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much for joining me tonight, as always.